Welcome to episode 35 of Real Health Radio. You can find the show notes and the links talked about in this episode at www.seven, so SEVEN, health.com/35.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Real Health Radio. This is going to be another show where it's me just on my own diving into a particular topic. And today's show is on the idea of happiness and what it means to be happy. And this episode has really been a long time coming, and it had actually been something I'd wanted to cover since first starting the show. And I wanted to spend some time really looking into the topic and then covering it in a fair amount of detail. And recently I was a guest lecturer for Summer Inanen's Rock Your Body program, as well as a guest lecturer for Laura Schoenfeld and Kelsey Marksteiner's Paleo Rehab program. And both of these talks, I've recorded both of them, but I don't think any of them have been released as yet as part of their programs. And when we were hashing out ideas for talks, the idea of happiness and creating more of an enjoyable life kept coming up. So it was the idea or the area that I chose to speak on for both of those programs, although like dealing with them in slightly different ways depending or because of the intended audience. And it meant that I was able to do a lot of research into the area and use it for those talks, but also I'm now able to use it for this podcast. So really like win-win. And I just want to set the frame for today, and I want to mention something that happened about 2 months ago. So I was listening to a podcast of Tim Ferriss's where he was interviewing Brene Brown, and I love Tim Ferriss's podcast. Some of his nutritional ideas I'm not that on board with and a little bit dubious of, but he is a fantastic interviewer and he gets amazing guests on his show. And so if you don't already listen to his show, I highly recommend checking it out. Brene Brown, I absolutely love. She's kind of like a hero of mine, and I don't really use that word very much, but it's probably the best way I can describe her. And basically, every client that I work with at some point in our working together will be sent her different TED Talks. I often suggest that they read some or all of her books. So Tim was interviewing Brene Brown as part of this, and at the end of the show, he always has some rapid fire questions, and these are questions that he asks all his guests. And one of the questions is, when you hear the word successful, who is the first person who comes to mind and why? And her response is that she doesn't think of anybody, and that she thinks of the word, when she hears successful, she sees the word in her mind redefined. And she feels that the word success is a very loaded word. And from her research, it has so many negative connotations that she doesn't actually use it in her vocabulary anymore. And Tim says that he also thinks the same way about the word happiness, and that the constant search for happiness that so many people are pursuing is very problematic. And this little chat, it really hit home with me because it's something that I'd been thinking about for a long time. It's something and about the just real misguided idea of what happiness is and how people should be experiencing it in their lives. And so as part of the show today, what I want to do is look at some of the misconceptions around the problems with our ideas around happiness, and then look at ways that people can cultivate a happier life or a more enjoyable experience in life with larger amounts of positive emotions, and what does this all really mean. Notice that some of my blog posts have been woven into the information as part of this show, but that's just because I think that information is very relevant to the topic. So probably a good place to start is what is happiness? What does it mean to feel happy? And I think that this is a really difficult question for most people to answer, because most people, or most of us, know the feeling of what happiness is for ourselves, but actually describing it can be rather tough. And for most people, I think the idea or the emotion of happiness is quite intense. It's quite a pleasurable feeling. But as nice as that feeling is, it's often rather fleeting. And the intense feeling that we normally associate with the word happiness isn't typically something that someone is in control of, despite the fact how important happiness is to us. And while a lot of us would like to feel that real intense sensation of happiness all the time, even if it was possible to create, I don't think it's a sensation that we would want to be having all the time. And I think it could be quite overwhelming. And to explain what I mean by this, I want to reference a book by a guy called Gary Chapman called The 5 Love Languages. And the premise of the book is that we all have different ways of feeling love, and he kind of says that there's 5 different ways. So some of us like to hear compliments and words of encouragement. Others like to be shown love through being bought gifts. Others prefer acts of service, so someone doing things like cooking or making the bed or cleaning out the gutters. For others, it's very much like touch and sexual intercourse, or just like feeling love from a touch perspective. For others, it's like undivided attention, someone giving them that attention and being able to talk, etc., and someone listening. So they're the 5 different options. And while most people appreciate some or all of these different things in their life, they'll normally have one specific way where they feel love and it's most important to them. And if their partner or your partner is showing you love in this way, then you're going to feel loved, and vice versa. And what often happens is people put all their effort into showing love in a way that doesn't matter for their partner. And no matter how much effort you put into that, they won't really appreciate it and they'll feel unloved, and vice versa. So it's a really simple concept, but I think it can be very useful. But why I'm bringing this up is he talks about the fact that there's 2 distinct stages within a relationship. So the first stage is like the honeymoon phase, and this honeymoon phase can last anywhere from like a couple of months through to like up to 2 years. And during this phase, there's like just this overwhelming amount of really intense feelings from both people, or hopefully if the relationship's going well from both people. And in that situation, you often can't sleep properly because you're so excited. You're like constantly daydreaming about the other person. Maybe your work starts to suffer because instead of doing the work that you should be doing, you're thinking of this other person. And really, in a lot of cases, you don't really care because you're just excited about getting that text from them or getting a WhatsApp message from them, or you can't wait to see them in the evening or on the weekend, etc. And at some point, that honeymoon period passes and you settle into a long-term relationship. And while there's still lots of love and fondness and fun with that other person, the intensity you get from, say, getting a text from them or waking up and seeing their face or seeing them get out of the shower, it isn't the same as it was in the beginning. And this isn't because the relationship is like destined to fail or that you're no longer having any desire for that person. It's just that there's been a shift and there's much more familiarity with your partner. And I bring this up, and I know it seems kind of convoluted, but it feels like people's expectations about what happiness should be in life is very much this honeymoon phase, that it should be this really intense feeling like a new relationship, and that should be going on all the time if they're quote unquote happy. And it's probably the same reason why a lot of relationships don't work, because people expect that there is that constant intensity all the time. But for practical purposes, it's really best that people don't have that constant, intense honeymoon phase all of their life. Because, as I said, it starts to mess up your sleep, it can mess up your concentration, your focus, your ability to work, etc. So maybe like one of the first big points is that our perception of what happiness is or what it means to be happy, it really needs to shift. And I talk a lot about expectations with clients because this has a huge impact on how someone feels about the results. If there's an expectation that happiness means this constant blissed out honeymoon type sensation, then people are constantly going to feel disappointed and feel like they're doing something wrong or they haven't reached this stage of happiness in inverted commas. Whereas if people have a different view of happiness, which I'm going to cover as part of this show, then people can realize more readily that they are experiencing it, despite not getting this like earth-shattering intense feelings all the time. And so like as I said, I think we have this misrepresentation or misinterpretation of what happiness is. And so, like, it's better to have a better description of it or understand how it could serve us better. And as part of answering this in terms of what is happiness really, then I want to call on the work of a guy called Dr. Martin Seligman. And Seligman is the former president of the American Psychology Association, and was a pioneer in the field of positive psychology. And so rather than just studying like why people are sad and how they can change this and improve this, positive psychology looks at like why people are happy and what we can learn from those experiences. And based on the research of Seligman, he talks about 3 different categories or types of happiness or creating positive emotions in our lives. And none of these different categories are mutually exclusive, and you can create all of them within your life. And these are described in much more detail in his book called Authentic Happiness, which I'll link to in the show notes. So the first type of happiness he calls the pleasant life. And this is described as a life that successfully pursues the positive emotions about the past, the present, and the future. And these positive emotions can come about from buying nice things, so having the nice house, the car, the designer clothes. It can also come from pleasurable experiences, like something simple, reading a book, or going rock climbing, or going on nice holidays, or going to nice restaurants. So it's like getting to do and experience the nice things in life, and also then knowing how to appreciate that stuff. And this is very much in keeping with what you would associate with like the Hollywood type of happiness. So the second is then known as the good life. And this is a life that focuses on engagement in activities and using our skills to create happiness. So we all have signature strengths, like things that we enjoy doing, that we're very good at doing, and we can then use these to provide ourselves with happiness. So this could be someone working in a particular job that provides them like really incredible satisfaction. It could be someone who's like raising and looking after children and really enjoying that experience. It could even be like someone who gets into a hobby and really diligently pursue that hobby. And that could be whether it be painting, whether it be playing chess, whether it be playing an instrument. And when someone is very good and very focused at doing something like this and getting into that like engagement style, you get into a state that's known as flow. And in this state of flow, like everything else just drips away and you become totally immersed. So you can experience a sense of total joy and just getting lost in what you're doing. Like time just stands still. And spending large amounts of your day or large amounts of your life or time in flow is very much associated with this second type of happiness. And it really is all about getting positive emotions through a sense of engagement. The final type of happy life is known as the meaningful life. And this is about knowing what your strengths are and then using them to serve other people. So believing in something that is larger than just you and acting on that belief for the better. So this could be something as simple as like working in a soup kitchen or doing some volunteer work, all the way up to someone who dedicates their life to this pursuit, someone like Mother Teresa or like what Bill and Melinda Gates are now doing with their foundation. And when Seligman then looks at the research on long-term happiness, like the meaningful life, so that's helping other people out, and then the good life, so happiness from engagement and using like your strengths, these register like far and away more important than the pleasurable life, so getting the nice cars and holidays and that kind of stuff. And in fact, like the pleasurable life has very little added value to long-term happiness unless the other two are also being included. And so this doesn't mean that it's not important, but Seligman really suggests that what we do is we pursue the full life. And this is a life that includes all 3 of these different generators of happiness. And so I want you to think for a moment about a situation. And this is something that happens a lot in my practice when I'm chatting with different clients. And it's the idea of, I'll be happier when I lose 10 pounds, or I'll be happier when I make some aesthetic change to my body. And if you're then thinking about that as a notion, which of these different categories does it fall into in terms of the meaningful life or the good life or the pleasant life? And really, it doesn't fall into any of them. Maybe it falls into like the pleasant life by proxy, in terms of, I think that when I'm going to be thinner, I'm going to be invited to more parties, or I'll go on more holidays, or I'll be able to buy those sexy clothes that I can then put on when I'm smaller, and how much of a difference is that going to make? But the problem is, like, this very rarely works. And one of the biggest reasons for this, and that's outside of just the fact that people aren't very successful at being able to manipulate their weight at will, is because it really undercuts our ability to then experience happiness through the other two, through the good life or the meaningful life. Because if you're constantly thinking about food and exercise and your body, how likely is it that you're going to be getting lost in the work or the hobby or getting into that state of flow? It's pretty unlikely. And clients say to me regularly that they realize just how much time they spend thinking about food and thinking about their body, and that it leaves little time to think or experience deeply anything else. And also, if you're in this state, it's pretty difficult to be using your signature strengths to help others out, because the focus so often is very internal and it's all consuming. And so it doesn't leave much for that other option. And I would say the exception here are those people who then only think of others, but at the total expense of themselves. So it's almost like they don't value their worth, they don't value themselves as an individual, and to feel some kind of worthiness, they just help everyone else out, never say no. But this gets to the point where it's damaging their health. They start to feel like a doormat, like secretly they're resenting the situation. So in this kind of scenario, like even if on paper they're meeting the goal of helping others out, in reality, they're not getting the benefits from it. And I'd even say that with this mindset of like, I'll be happier when I lose X amount of pounds, or I'll be happier when I change my physique, or whatever it may be, you also run the risk, and often happens, is you miss out on the benefits of the pleasant life as well. So even if you are doing nice things like going on holiday or going to nice restaurants or buying nice clothes or a nice car or whatever it is, the appreciation for this stuff is often totally missing, because the focus then becomes, I would be so much happier if I was less weight, or I was doing this and I weigh less, or whatever it is. So you can't even experience those nice things in life as well. So I really suggest that you use the work of Dr. Seligman as a bit of a framework for helping to think about happiness and how you can start to experience or cultivate more of it in your life. Because often when I chat with people, their lack of happiness comes from the fact that they totally blank on the question of what makes you happy. And if you can be finding ways to be doing nice things in life and actually appreciating them, if you can be finding hobbies or ways that you can be getting into that flow state where you can get totally lost and immersed in something, if you can be helping out others by using your strengths, then happiness will be the result. And it might not be the constant blissed out state of happiness. It might not be you with this massive big grin on your face all the time. But if we were to measure your happiness over time, things will be improving, and often significantly. I will add a caveat to this, and this is a big one. Too often when people go searching for happiness or do things in their life with the explicit thought of, I hope this will make me happy, it doesn't end so well. And there was a quote in an article that I read recently that really stood out to me. It was an article by Mike Weeks, who I recently had on the show. And I actually asked him about this article and about this quote. If you haven't listened to the show, I strongly suggest you do. Mike is like a very, very incredible guy. He's lived an incredible life. And so it's a very interesting podcast. He's a great storyteller. So I'll link to it in the show notes, and I implore you to check it out. But anyway, like the quote in the article was, chasing happiness is a bit like chasing a nervous chicken. The closer you get, the speedier it flaps away. And happiness, in my mind, should be a side benefit rather than the main aim. Find things that you enjoy doing, that engage you, that you want to do for no other reason that you love spending time with them. Or find ways to help others out that can use your strengths, where you get to experience the difference that you can make in other people's lives. And this stuff that you do it because you enjoy those moments. And long term, they will improve your happiness. But each and every time that you do them, you're not guaranteed this like immediate rush of overwhelming happiness. But over the long haul, it will definitely help. And another reason or another issue that I see is the real faulty logic around like health and happiness and people's misunderstanding of what it means to be healthy, but what's also involved in like creating health and the happiness that this is then going to create. And especially among the clients that I work with, there is a pursuit of what I call the appearance of health. So people who believe that healthy looks a certain way physically. So they're doing what they can to achieve this, whether it be losing weight or toning up or making some kind of aesthetic change. And following this like really narrow standard of beauty and trying to match up with this under the guise of like healthy in inverted commas. And it's not just like the appearance of health in terms of how someone looks, but also like the eating or the exercise that they choose to do and how this then appears to the outside world. So like people wanting to be eating organic or drinking green smoothies or eating paleo or vegan or taking pictures of themselves exercising or taking pictures of certain meals. Like they want the outside world to look at them and their pursuits and say, wow, this person must be healthy. And if I have a client or a potential client, and we're talking about this stuff, like I will often suggest to them, like you should be stopping exercise or really reducing how much exercise you should be doing, or you should start eating more of these certain foods that you've been avoiding. And a lot of the time people will believe me and they're like, I understand what you're saying, I get it. But they're then worried about how will this appear to others? How will other people view them and their health? And so if someone's going to a CrossFit gym or going to a gym and they're doing that 5 days a week, like what will their friends think if they're now having time off or they're only doing it 2 days a week? And say if someone's been limiting carbs or limiting fat or they haven't been eating fruit or haven't had fruit juices or whatever it is, and they now start including that stuff in their diet, what are other people going to be thinking when they're consuming it? Or it might not even be specific foods. It might be rather that they're now having a bigger lunch and they're having a bigger lunch at work instead of just having a salad for lunch. And how is this going to appear to others? And I find that this kind of pursuit of the appearance of health in inverted commas and the all-encompassing methods that people follow and trying to do to reach this, it really creates a problem. And one of the biggest reasons for this is that you end up using and wasting so much time to the point that other areas of life suffers. And areas that would contribute to improved health and also to improved happiness don't then get focused on and just fall by the wayside. And so let me give you a couple of examples. So one of the biggest contributors to health, to happiness, to longevity is solid relationships. So this includes relationships with your partner, with your siblings, with friends, and the wider community. And this piece of advice has come out of research at Harvard by the study of adult development. And it's this fascinating study that's been going on for 75 years. It's a 75-year-old longitudinal study, and it's still going today. And the information that I'm going to share here is actually taken from a TED talk by Robert Waldinger, who is the director of the study. I highly recommend watching the TED Talk. I'll link to it in the show notes. But as an overview, the study started back in 1938 with two distinct groups of participants. So one group, there was 268 men, and these were all college or Harvard College sophomores from the classes of 1939 through to 1944. Then there were 456 12 to 16-year-old boys who grew up in inner city Boston, and they were described as disadvantaged non-delinquents. So you really had these two groups of people coming from very distinct and different backgrounds and beginnings, and all going on to lead very different lives. And so as part of the study, every 2 years the men are interviewed and they're asked about their work, their home life, their health. The researchers get their medical records from the doctors. They then also take blood tests they'll take bloods and then run tests for them. They do like brain scans on them. They videotape them in their home, talking to their wives and to their children. About a decade ago, they also started to involve the wives as part of the project and started to track them as well. They also started following the children of these men and involving them as part of the study. So you can imagine that this is a huge amount of information that they now have, that they've collected over 75 years, interviewing these people every 2 years. And these men are now in their 80s. And so they're able to look at, okay, where are they now? And then go back to what was going on in their 40s and 50s and try and compute what is the information or what is the helpful stuff that we can pull out of this. And the biggest thing that the study has found relates to relationships. The men in both groups, so whether we're talking about the Harvard group or the inner city Boston group, those who reported being closer to their family, to their friends or community, tended to be happier and healthier than their less social counterparts. And they also tended to live longer. And by comparison, people who said that they were lonelier reported feeling less happy. They also had worse physical and mental health. And relationships don't have to be perfect. And it's probably foolhardy to believe that that's going to be the case. And what the research or the study showed, that often people will have ups and downs and times of arguing or bickering or tough times. But despite these moments, if people at the core truly felt supported and that they could count on their partner or family or friends or community in their times of need, then this didn't take a toll on their health. And the people who were the most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were also the healthiest at age 80. And the strength of relationships was a better predictor for health than really anything else. And in fact, those who were the healthiest of 80 didn't necessarily have the best blood work in terms of things like cholesterol or other sorts of things. But if they had strong and healthy relationships, it then predisposed them to good health. And to quote Robert Waldinger, the director of the study, he said, "Society places a lot of emphasis on wealth and leaning into our work. But over and over these 75 years, our study has shown that people who fared the best were the people who leaned into relationships with family, with friends, and with community." Now, for so many of the clients I see, their constant worry about health and whether they should eat this food or that food, or should I eat out at this restaurant, or should I bring my weights on holidays, or whatever it might be, all of these cut into their relationships. It makes it hard for them to be present when they're out at social events or even to want to go to social events. And when you're having a wrestling match in your mind about whether or not you should eat a chocolate brownie, or you're creating some exercise regime in your head to counteract the meal that you've just eaten, it's hard to be engaged with people who are talking to you. Another example would be people including more NEAT in their life. And NEAT stands for non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And this is the energy that you expend for everything that you do that's not sleeping, eating, or sports-like activity. And it ranges from energy expended like walking to work or walking around the garden or walking in nature. It could be things like typing, performing yard work, undertaking some kind of agricultural task, so like having a little mini vegetable patch. It could also include just fidgeting. And so much of the focus these days around movement is on exercise. So going to the gym, lifting weights, doing CrossFit, going spinning, that kind of thing. But even if you're someone who does this stuff, you're probably only doing it for like 5 or 6 hours a week. And for most people, it's going to be a lot less than that. So what are you then doing for the rest of the time? Like never before in history have we exercised like we do now. Like more people are members of gyms, more people are doing specific exercise than ever before. But at the other end of the spectrum, like never in history have we been so sedentary and had life so easy from a physical perspective. Like life used to be filled with constant low-level movement, like making a meal, washing clothes, farming, even working in a factory. Like so much of the day was filled with constant movement and with constant low-grade exercise that's now just totally disappeared. And it turns out that this movement is really important for our health. Like hitting it hard in the gym 4 days a week and then spending the rest of the time being sedentary only gets you so far. And if you're then to compare someone like that who hits it hard in the gym and then doesn't do very much versus someone who does very little formal exercise but then spends lots of their time doing low impact movement, the person who does no formal exercise but does lots of movement from a health perspective is way better off. And the thing is, like, it's not sexy to say you should do some gardening or you should go for a walk. Like, people are unlikely to be getting abs or look buff from doing these kind of pursuits. So people don't see the importance in them. And so much of exercise is a calories game where people think about how much this and this activity is going to burn. And so it then becomes like a situation where simple exercise like walking or gardening, like in their head, it doesn't burn enough calories. So it obviously isn't valuable. But again, things like NEAT and doing that low impact exercise, it's so important for health, but also for happiness. And so things like relationships and NEAT are just two examples in this long list of healthy pursuits that also lead to increased happiness that people really miss out on because they don't see the value in them. They're chasing the appearance of health and they believe that when they look a certain way that they're going to be happy. And I kind of see this happening for a couple of reasons. And the first is that people misunderstand what improved physical health is going to give them. And normally it's not even about physical health. They're really after aesthetics, but we can call it physical health if we want. But in their mind, like physical health starts to represent to them that they'll meet the man or woman of their dreams, or they'll, if they are with that person already, that they'll have like an improved relationship when they have this improved body, or that with improved physical health that they'll get a raise, or they'll be more confident, or they'll stand up for themselves more, or they'll turn heads when they walk into a room or whatever. And like physical health becomes this idea about what's going to happen when they reach some level. And the problem is like so many of these ideas have absolutely nothing to do with physical health. But when someone makes physical improvements and then they don't get these things from this list, the idea is like, I just need to make more physical improvements. And when I reach this new level, then these things are going to happen. And so the goalposts just keep moving and more of the focus is like on physical side of things, with less priority then being given to mental health, emotional health. There's an idea known as impact bias that I think is really important and relevant here. And impact bias is the mistaken tendency to overestimate the impact that extreme events will have in our lives. And these extreme events can be extreme positive or extreme negative events. And actually, they don't have the influence on long-term happiness nearly as much as we think they will. So as an example, there was a very famous study done by researchers at Northwestern University in 1978 that discovered that the happiness levels of paraplegics and of lottery winners were essentially the same within a year of the event occurring. So you heard that correctly. One person won a life-changing sum of money, another person lost the use of their limbs, and within a year the two people were equally happy. It's important to note that this particular study, it hasn't been replicated in the years since it came out, but the general trend has been supported again and again. We have a really strong tendency to overestimate the impact that extreme events will have in our lives. And I think this is very true in the case of improvements to physical health. We often have this mistaken belief about the massive change it's going to make, when in actual fact, the change can often be very minimal. And this is because if we improve our physical health, but we do this and it's detrimental to our mental health or our emotional health, then have things really improved? And for most, the answer will be no. And for many, it's actually got a lot worse. And I really think that people need to truly ask themselves, like, why do I want to be healthy? Or why do I want to live a long life? And health, from my perspective, should be a stepping stone to allow you to do the important things in your life. It should be allowing you to do the things that then lead to happiness. But improved health won't create happiness in and of itself. And I would say that health isn't even a prerequisite. If you can be finding ways to provide your body or provide your life with positive emotions and positive experiences and appreciate that stuff, if you can be doing activities that allow you to get into flow, if you can be of service to others, like regardless of your state of health, you can still be happy. But if you're struggling, like mentally and emotionally, because you're putting all of your focus into creating some physical changes, it's unlikely your true life goals are being pursued, and instead you're focusing on something pretty menial. A very sobering way of thinking about this stuff is to look at some of the comments that people regularly make on their deathbeds about regrets or things that they wish they could change. Things like, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I'd stayed in touch with friends. I wish that I'd let myself be happier. So physical health or aesthetic changes really can only get someone so far. And if this is happening at the expense of so many other things in someone's life, it's very unlikely that this is going to lead to increased happiness. And another idea or another line of thought is happiness largely happens within our head and is almost irrespective of circumstances. You can have someone who is a happy peasant, you can have someone who is a frustrated millionaire. And a big part of this is what people say to themselves and what they focus on. Like the words that you utter in your head nonstop each day has a huge impact on your beliefs about how you feel or about a situation, and therefore your happiness. I've used this example before, but like imagine you are in a street and you see a mother just having like a meltdown on a small child. She's telling her that she's such a disappointment, that she was a mistake, that she was never doing anything right, that she should be more like her brother or her cousin, that she's just such a failure, and like really nasty things and horrible stuff, and just is going on and on. And as you watch this scenario, like, how do you think that little girl is feeling? Like, my estimation that she's feeling pretty terrible about herself. And it's easy for us to make that connection and realize that she's going to be feeling bad. But people then do this to themselves all the time and expect different results. People talk to themselves like this day in and day out. They then have low self-esteem, they have negative beliefs about themselves and what they're capable of, they have lots of negative emotions, and they then wonder why. And it's also not just what you say to yourself, but also like the memories and the events that you focus on. Like the memories and events that you choose are going to have a big impact on how you perceive the world and the beliefs that are likely to then come up as part of that, and therefore your happiness. Like, for example, if you show a 7-year-old child a horror film before bed, the chances are like exponentially higher that on this night they're going to get a nightmare, they're going to wake up, they're going to believe someone's under their bed or hiding in their closet. Same thing happens to you if you keep playing movies in your mind that are, in a sense, a horror film. And one of the big things I say to people around this stuff is making the distinction between what is a fact and what is a story. So a fact may be that someone has put on a certain amount of weight, and that's true. The story is then what they then tell themselves that fact means. So maybe they say to themselves that they now can't wear certain clothes, or they won't get some promotion, or they won't be able to meet that special someone, or if they are with that special someone, if they weigh less, the relationship would be better, etc. None of these things are facts. They are stories that you've created or that someone has created in their mind, in their head, to explain a situation. And you could have someone who has the exact same set of facts, i.e. they put on weight, who is having a totally different experience in life. So they are someone who totally loves the skin that they are in, who is getting promoted at work, who is meeting that partner, or they're already in a relationship where they're with someone and they're in a very happy and loving relationship. So all of the things that someone says can't happen because of their weight is already happening for someone else. And I find that a lot of the time people can get this really easy when looking at it for someone else. So it's like, oh yeah, I can see how they would be happy, or I can see how that works for someone else. But they can't then understand how it can then work for them. And what I suggest in these situations, a good way of dealing with it is known as third position. And so in any situation, there are 3 different perceptual positions. First position is you living the experience from your perspective. So looking through your own eyes, feeling your feelings about what's going on in that situation. Second position is looking at it from someone else's point of view who is involved in that situation. So for example, if you're having a chat with a friend, second position would be you being in their body in a sense. So what is that person seeing? How are they hearing what you're saying? How are they feeling because of that situation? And then third position is when you then take a step back and you become an observer. So it's like you're watching what is going on as a play or a TV show. So in this position, you're then an unbiased observer. You're not feeling the emotions of yourself in position 1. You're not feeling the emotions of what it's like for the person in position 2. You're totally separate as an observer. And getting this distance helps people to be more objective, to offer a better advice that then isn't intertwined with emotions that someone could be experiencing in that specific moment. So for example, if I have a client who's freaking out about eating a certain meal, or when they look at themselves in the mirror in some outfit, when they feel this happening, or they feel this very intense set of negative emotions coming up in a situation, or anxiety or whatever, I suggest that they then go into third position. And I'll actually get them to move from where they're sitting or standing. So if they're sitting at like a dinner table and they're having food and this is when the anxiety's coming up, I'll get them to get out of their chair, to walk to the side, and to be standing looking back at the chair where they were sitting. Or if they are looking at themselves in the mirror, I'll get them to then move to the side. So they're now looking back at where they were standing, and I'll get them to like hallucinate as if they're still back in that chair. So they're looking at someone as if they're still sitting in that chair, or they're looking themselves still like watching themselves in the mirror. So as if they're looking at a friend, or as if they're looking at someone else, but they're hallucinating that their self is still there. And I get them to detach from this and to pretend that they're then giving advice to someone else. I'll often say, what would you be saying to your daughter or your son, or what would you be saying to a best friend in this situation? And so how could you then be helping that person out? What compassionate advice could you be giving them? Can you start to see the absurdity of the situation, that you're freaking out about something that is so minor and so insignificant? How can you relay this to them? Because again, it's so much easier to give advice when you're looking at a friend or when they're explaining the situation. And so putting someone in that position can then be very helpful. And so for me, when I'm doing this with clients, I find that it can have like a monumental impact on happiness and sanity levels. And someone can feel so much better at pulling themselves out of like very crazy emotional situations, and are then better able to give helpful advice to themselves, better able to accept the situation and to understand what's going on. The final thing I just want to mention around happiness was some really interesting research that was done on age and happiness. And it's not what people would probably expect, and it's not what I expected before I looked into this. So Sanford School of Public Policy at Duke University, they asked a bunch of 30-year-olds and then another group of 70-year-olds which group they think is more likely to be happy, the 30-year-olds or the 70-year-olds. Both groups said the 30-year-olds. But when they then asked them to rate their own well-being and asked them different questions about happiness, etc., it turns out that the 70-year-olds were a much happier group. And when you then look at the research on average happiness levels across age, we see something rather unexpected, or at least it was very unexpected for me. So from the age of about 18 onwards, our levels of happiness start to drop down, getting lower as we go through our 20s. Between our mid-20s to about mid-30s, it plateaus, but then starts to drop down again from our mid-30s through to our mid-40s. And it's then around about age 47, age 48, that our happiness levels then start to come back up again and continue to increase. And so by age 60, we're about as happy as we were in our mid-20s. By our 70s, we are as happy as we were when we were 18. And then as life goes on, levels of happiness continue to increase. Look, obviously, this is the average, and depending on your life circumstances, your graph of happiness may be very different to this. But this pattern of happiness, it happens across like different countries despite totally different backgrounds. It even holds when people or when the researchers control for things like whether someone had children or not, for employment, for income. And given this trend, they then started to look in like, why is this happening? And this for me is the really important thing, because it isn't actually age per se, but how people's lives change their thinking. And if you can adopt this change of perception now rather than waiting to reaching the age of 60 or 70, you can start to reap the benefits of this increased happiness. And the big mental change that happens that leads to this happiness as someone gets older can be best described as acceptance. Older people have fewer rows and come up with better solutions for conflicts. They are better at controlling their emotions, better at accepting misfortune, and less prone to anger. And so in one study, for instance, subjects were asked to listen to recordings of people supposedly saying disparaging things about them. And both the older and the younger people were similarly saddened, but the older people were less angry and they were less inclined to pass judgment. And so they'd often take the view of, you can't please all the people all the time. And I would say like this probably gets easier as people get older because of like the whole dying thing. And a professor of psychology at Stanford University, Laura Carstensen, when looking at this issue of age and happiness, she said, because the old know they are closer to death, they grow better at living in the present. They come to focus on things that matter now, such as feelings, and less on long-term goals. When young people look at older people, they think how terrifying it must be nearing the end of life. But older people know what matters most. And whether you are 20, whether you're 60, doesn't matter what age you are, our fate is all going to be the same. Like, in the end, we are all going to die at some point. And adopting the mentality of living in the moment and worrying less about the opinions of others. I mean, rather than waiting for like nearing death to force this change upon us, it's a great approach that we can be taking now to be increasing our everyday happiness. And to quote William James, who is an American philosopher, he said, "How pleasant is the day when we can give up striving to be young and slender." And this also, it really isn't just about happiness. It's also about health, because happiness doesn't just make us happy, it can also make us healthier. For example, there was an experiment done at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh where subjects were infected with cold and flu viruses. And the results found that the happier types were less likely to catch the virus, and it also showed that those who were happy who then did catch the virus had fewer symptoms of the illness when they did. And this also, it just harps back to what I was saying earlier about the study of adult development and how important relationships are. And so much of what people are doing under the guise of health or also under the guise of this will make me happier, like trying to lose weight through dieting, through monitoring their food to the nth degree, exercising to the point of exhaustion. These things are all, a lot of the times, undermining people's health and undermining people's happiness. And yet the things that people often discard as worthless or even a sign of weakness, like spending more time with hanging out with friends or family, or just becoming more accepting of their body and their reality, turn out to be very healthy practices, and also practices that very much increase and improve our levels of happiness. So that is it for this show on happiness and what does it mean to be happy. I implore you to start to use some of the advice in this, especially the work of Dr. Seligman. I think people can start to focus more on like, how can I get in flow? How can I be helping others? And change the idea of what does it really mean to be happy? It's not necessarily this blissed out feeling that people are chasing after. It can be coming in many different forms to that and experienced in very different ways. So that's it for this show. Next week, it's another guest. Again, it's already recorded. It's a really great show. So I look forward to catching you then, and have a great week.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7health.com.